Today we have an Appalachian Civil War story for you about the most notorious Confederate guerrilla commander to come out of the hills of eastern Kentucky and East Tennessee, Champ Ferguson. Hello folks, I'm Steve Gilley along with Rod Mullins, and this is Stories, A History of Appalachia. Champ Ferguson was born on November 29, 1821 in Clinton County, Kentucky, oldest of 10 kids born to William R. and Zilpha Huff Ferguson. Now, most of the folks from Clinton County were middle-class farmers who owned few, if any, slaves. Ferguson followed his father into farming, but apparently didn't have a calm farmer's disposition, did he, Rod?
No, let's just put it this way. You wouldn't be singing Old MacDonald's Farm around with him, that's for sure. Ferguson developed quite the reputation for violence in the years prior to the Civil War. One biographer calling it his cracker characteristics, and those cracker characteristics resulted in a murder in 1858. Now, you see, Ferguson kept a still house, which was exactly what it was called. There he made whiskey and apple brandy, like some of my relatives used to do, and loved to partake in it, along with his friends. Gambling was another one of his pastimes, including horse racing. All this mixed together into a violent temper. And folks, we're not talking a mild and meek Old MacDonald here. We're talking violent temper.
In the spring of 1857, two brothers from Fentress County, Tennessee, just across the border from Clinton County, came to Kentucky seeking to buy hogs. Ferguson and his brothers were among the local farmers who sold porkers to the two brothers, Floyd and Alexander Evans. Ferguson sold his hogs on a promissory note and delivered the animals to the two men. On the date the note was due, Ferguson met Alexander Evans on his way back to Clinton County and was informed that Brother Floyd had, quote, run off with all the money, end quote. Ferguson sued Evans in the Tennessee courts for payment of the money and won. Still, Evans didn't pay. So Champ Ferguson decided that if the hogs hadn't been paid for, then, well, he might as well pay a visit to the Alexander Evans farm and see if he couldn't get his property back. It went so well, he and his friends paid several visits, transporting horses back across the state line to Kentucky, where the local sheriff would seize them and sell them to satisfy Ferguson's judgment. Well, as you could imagine, Rod, that did not set well with the Evans brothers, who charged Champ with larceny in Tennessee for taking the horses from the Evans farm back to Clinton County. That made Champ Ferguson a wanted man in the volunteer state.
Well, I would call that even Steven on trade to a certain degree. If you're swapping out horses for those porkers, you know, you're going to come away with something, and that's what he tried to do. But everything came to a head at a camp meeting. Of all things, a religious revival meeting at Lick Creek Campground in Fentress County, Tennessee. Yes, Ferguson attended the meeting, where he happened to run into the Evanses and found out about that warrant for his arrest. The Evanses brothers got the local authorities to come serve the warrant on Champ, a man named James Reed, who just so happened to be related to the Evans brothers. Well, a mob gathered, and he began to flee, but Floyd Evans began throwing rocks at him, with Champ Ferguson returning rock fire. Okay, Constable Reed approached and was hit square in the stomach with a rock by Ferguson, who proceeded to slice him open with a knife, killing him. He then turned on Floyd Evans and would have done the same, but he accidentally sliced his own thumb by accident and succeeded only in wounding Evans. Ferguson, in the meantime, then took off.
Well, eventually, Ferguson was captured and jailed, but his family made his bail and he returned home to await trial. And that would have been that but for this little thing called the Civil War. And the bail, along with the coming storm, caused a split in the Ferguson family. You see, most of his relatives were staunch Unionists, while Champ Ferguson was a Confederate. He moved his wife and children to the Calf Killer River Valley in White County, Tennessee. And with Tennessee's secession, the little matter of Champ's murder trial just went poof and disappeared, with Ferguson himself later saying that he promised to fight for the Confederacy in return for the charges being dropped. And thus began the career of one of the most violent Confederate guerrillas. You see, East Tennessee was strongly pro-Union during the war, with the notable exception of Sullivan County, and Ferguson was determined to punish those traitors in their midst. Early in the war, Champ Ferguson organized a company and began attacking any civilians he believed supported the war. Terrorism, if you will. There were a lot of local feuds that were fought under the guise of war at this time, too. While General John Hunt Morgan and Major General Joseph Wheeler were in the area, Ferguson and his men coordinated with them, but since they weren't part of the regular Confederate Army, they rarely observed the rules of war. And there's some stories about that, aren't there, Rod?
Yeah, well, there were stories about Ferguson's sadism, one of which involved Champ, get this, beheading prisoners and rolling their heads down the hillsides into local farms and towns to, get this, terrorize the population. He also didn't hesitate to kill bedridden men, including a neighbor, William Frog, who was in the bed with, of all things, measles. Ferguson accused Frog of contracting the measles while visiting a Union recruitment center, which he denied. Ferguson didn't care, though. He calmly pulled out his pistol and shot his neighbor twice right in front of the horrified wife and child, killing him instantly. Now, about a month after Frog's death, Champ stole a man's horse, cursing him by calling him a, quote, goddamned Lincolnite, end quote, and took off on the aforesaid horse to the home of another neighbor, an older man named Reuben Wood, a lifelong friend of Champ's. That, of course, didn't matter because word had gotten out that Wood had also visited the Union Recruitment Center, and Ferguson would have none of that either. So Wood admitted to Ferguson that he indeed had visited Camp Robinson, which earned him a cussing political diatribe from Champ, ending with, quote, don't you beg and don't you dodge, end quote. According to his wife and daughter, witnesses, the old man reminded Ferguson of all he had done for him, which Champ acknowledged, and then he coldly shot him graveyard dead.
Well, the most well-known example of Champ Ferguson's terrorism involved members of the 5th United States Colored Cavalry. Now, the 5th was an all-African-American unit under the command of white officers, and these men had been part of the Battle of Saltville. Now, several of these men had been wounded and put in the hospital to recover from their battle injuries before being sent to POW camps. Ferguson and his band of guerrillas entered the hospital in Saltville and began coolly murdering the wounded, including the wounded white officers in their hospital beds. And they would have finished all of them off in their rampage through the hospital had it not been for the arrival of Thomas's Legion of Cherokee Indians, a Confederate unit, which stopped the slaughter of the wounded Union soldiers. As soon as Champ Ferguson learned of their arrival, he and his men hightailed it out of town. So incensed was the Confederate military at this incident, he had ordered Ferguson's arrest for murder. He was found and arrested and jailed on February 8, 1865, and held until Robert E. Lee's surrender at Appomattox in April, when Brigadier General John Echols ordered his release.
Well, after his release from prison for the Saltville incident, Champ Ferguson headed back to his home along the Tennessee-Kentucky border to resume his personal war. He killed his last 2 men on May 1st and was quickly declared an outlaw by Union military authorities. Champ Ferguson then disbanded his men and went home to his Tennessee farm. But if he thought that he could return to some kind of normalcy once things got quiet, Champ Ferguson was sadly mistaken, because Union soldiers sought him out and arrested him, sending him off for trial in Nashville.
At his trial, he was charged with the murders of 53 men. His trial became a major media event covered in all the newspapers and became one of the first stories about Appalachia to run in the yellow press. There were 43 witnesses at the trial, with the most famous being the Union guerrilla and deadly adversary to Champ, Tinker Dave Beatty. You see, each had done his best to kill the other during the war, and this was Beatty's last chance to seal Ferguson's fate. Well, Ferguson himself helped. He readily admitted that he and his men had killed the victims named, and to top it off, Champ told that he himself had killed over 100 men, but that all of this was justified and part of his duty as a soldier. Champ Ferguson was found guilty on October 10, 1865, and sentenced to hang. When sentence was announced, Ferguson was allowed to speak, and he responded,
"I am yet and will die a rebel. I killed a good many men, of course, but I never killed a man who I did not know was seeking my life. I had always heard that the Federals would not take me prisoner, but would shoot me down wherever they found me. That is what made me kill more than I otherwise would have done. I repeat that I die a rebel, out and out, and my last request is that my body be removed to White County, Tennessee, and be buried in good rebel soil."
In the end, Champ Ferguson was hanged in Nashville on October 20th, 1865, swift justice, and that made him one of only 2 men who were executed for their conduct in the Civil War, the other one being the commandant of the infamous Andersonville prison in Georgia, Captain Henry Weirs. Ferguson was buried in the France Cemetery near Sparta, Tennessee. And that's the story of Confederate guerrilla Champ Ferguson, another bit of the history of this place we call home, Appalachia. Thanks for watching. Be sure to go down below and click the subscribe button, then ding the bell to be notified whenever we release a new story. Give us a thumbs up, too, if you don't mind. Again, thanks for watching. Until next we meet, y'all take care. So long, everybody.